Mr. Kraft, members of the council, guests, and friends, on behalf of our Board of Trustees, it's a great pleasure to welcome you this evening. Let me remind you very quickly that our next program will be on the 24th of this month, this room, the Ambassador of Turkey to the United States, which should be an extraordinary opportunity for all of us. And because the programs are going to come fairly quickly, let me remind you that we have a program on the 9th of June. That'll be with the head of the delegation of the European Union to the United States, who is the equivalent of being the ambassador of the EU. And we'll have a piracy panel on the 15th. It's not a dress-up party. You can just, but it's a great theme though, and a very interesting question. And then Senator Cardin will join us on the 27th, and of June, yes, 27th of June, thank you. 24th and the 9th of June, the 15th of June, the 27th of June, and Cardin's theme is terrific. It's ... to the shores of Tripoli. American policy in the Middle East in the post-Obama era, which is an interesting title. And that's to articulate the regime's policy will be fascinating. But in any case, those are the upcoming programs. But tonight, of course, we've got another very interesting topic. That is the three trade agreements, Panama, Colombia, and Korea. Our guest is in the department, or in the Bureau of Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs at the State Department. He serves as a Deputy Assistant Secretary, and more specifically, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Trade Policy and Programs, which is a most interesting position. Of course, the administration is banking on increasing our exports tremendously in the near future, and it becomes a kind of centerpiece of U.S. Economic policy. Our guest has been with the State Department for almost a couple of decades. I won't mention all his early assignments, but they're fun. I mean, they're Rome and they're Haiti and the Dominican Republic as a desk officer, and dealing with the Asian economics as well. But over the past decade or so, he's focused upon trade policy. For a one-year period of time, he directed the desk or the office that deals with bilateral telecommunications and internet policy. And then at the next level, he was the director of the Office of Multilateral Affairs, which is one of the four major offices within the trade area, I believe. And then now occupies the office of Deputy Assistant Secretary responsible for trade policy in general, which is really a far-ranging area. He supervises all four of the major trade offices. In the course of his career, early on, he's dealt with NAFTA and Uruguay round. In that second position, which I mentioned, is concerning multilateral policies. Of course, was a major negotiator on the Doha round. He's dealt with the World Trade Organization, of course, the OECD, the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum, and other multilateral organizations. Participated in the preparations for the G8 and G20 summits. We're very glad to have you here. And certainly his preparation is marvelous for the task at hand. So it's my great pleasure to present to you Mr. William E. Kraft, Jr.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bird, for that very kind introduction. Let me start by humbly and deeply apologizing for being late. I'm glad to be able to blame the Yankees for it in part. It's also in part due to the complete ineptitude of the people doing road construction on the Washington Beltway, which is an absolute parking lot at the moment. But I am deeply sorry to be late, and I'm very happy to be here and happy to stay and take questions for as long as we need to. As Dr. Bird suggested, I've been doing this for 30-something years, but I think I've got a very fun job, and I really enjoy it, and I hope to keep doing it for a little while. Over the weekend, I'm going to fly out to Paris to go to the OECD Ministerial. It's the 50th anniversary of the OECD being founded. Secretary Clinton's going to lead our delegation, and she's going to give a couple of speeches that sort of try to draw an arc going back to the Second World War and the Marshall Plan. And of course, the OECD was deeply involved in implementing the Marshall Plan, and then give a little bit of a vision going forward into the 21st century. So that'll be fun. And then I come back for a couple of days to Washington, and then I go again with Secretary Clinton to Lusaka, where we're having an Africa Growth and Opportunity Act ministerial meeting, and USTR Kirk will go with that, and we will spend 2 days talking about ways that the United States is working with Africa to encourage their development and to see if we can work together in ways to speed that up. So when I'm not stuck on your beltway or my beltway, I actually kind of have a fun job. One of the reasons why I was really looking forward to coming here and talking to you all is to help pass the word that the Obama administration is deeply committed to pursuing an ambitious trade agenda that will help our economy grow, as Dr. Bird noted, double U.S. exports, and support good jobs for American workers. Since I have an unemployed college graduate, I'm really interested in that job creation thing myself. Our agenda includes concluding the pending FTAs with free trade agreements. Washington guys tend to speak in acronyms. If I lapse into that, just throw something at me and I'll try to stop. Our free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Renewal of strong and robust trade adjustment assistance that supports Americans who need training and other services if they lose their jobs in some way because of trade. Renewal of our trade preference programs, including GSP, the Indian Trade Preferences Act, and elements of the African Growth and Opportunity Act that either have expired or will be expiring soon, and pursuing permanent normal trade relations with Russia as they get ready to join the World Trade Organization. Yes, sir.
Could you slow down a bit, please? You're speaking louder than I can, or faster than I can listen.
Okay, I'll try to click into translator speed, which is something we do at the State Department. I will try to slow it down. I'm sorry. I was just, the whole traffic thing gets me excited. So, take a breath. Thank you, sir. Okay. Okay. Well, tonight I would like to focus my remarks on the 3 pending free trade agreements that are going to be going up to the Congress in the next couple of weeks, and touch a little bit on why I think and why the administration thinks they'll benefit the country as a whole, and in fact Maryland in particular. Of the 3 trade agreements, free trade agreements, say that 3 times fast, that are pending or soon to be pending in front of Congress, Korea is by far the largest. In fact, the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement, which we call KORUS, is bigger than our last 9 free trade agreements all put together. So I'll start talking about that one. We care about KORUS because it will strengthen not only our economic relationship, but our vital strategic alliance with Korea. Our ties are strong with Korea, starting with the huge Korean diaspora in the United States. We have over 2 million Americans who identify themselves as being of Korean descent, and more than 100,000 Koreans have chosen to study here at universities. At the same time, many Americans have ties to Korea from our shared experiences in the Korean War, military service on the peninsula, and volunteer service through the Peace Corps. There are over 120,000 Americans currently living, studying, and working in South Korea. Our shared values of peace and democracy extend not only to the Korean Peninsula, but also around the entire Asia-Pacific Rim and the world. Over the last 60 years, our alliance with Korea has expanded from its military roots to develop into one of the most vibrant and dynamic full-spectrum strategic partnerships anywhere in the world. Recent events in North Korea have reminded us that the alliance is a vital linchpin, not only for the security of the Korean Peninsula and the United States, but also for the Asia-Pacific region as a whole. But KORUS is not only important to us because of the U.S.-Korea foreign policy relationship, it's also important for America's prosperity. KORUS represents a historic opportunity to increase exports, create better jobs in the United States, and bolster the American economy. The U.S.-Korean economic relationship is one of the world's most vibrant, with two-way goods trade reaching nearly $88 billion in 2010. Korea is our 7th largest trading partner, and the United States is South Korea's 3rd largest trading partner. The reality of these trade deals that we're talking about is that the United States is going to gain more in access to those markets than is the opposite case. The United States is already the most open major global trading economy. That's one reason why we see many more Korean cars on the streets here than we see U.S. cars on the streets in Seoul. That's also why it's particularly important that we make the playing field more equitable for American workers in all 3 of these markets. U.S. exporters currently pay an average of 6.2% tariff, or nearly $1.3 billion a year in Korean tariffs on industrial goods that will be phased out once we pass the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. Now more than ever, America's ability to create jobs here at home depends on our ability to export goods and services to the world. Today, exports support nearly 10 million American jobs, and these are well-paying positions. Americans in jobs that depend on trade earn on an average 13 to 18% more than the national average of people in industries that don't export. We are aggressively pursuing U.S. exports to fulfill the President's National Export Initiative of doubling exports over the next 5 years. An increase at this level would support up to 2 million new jobs, helping to put the American people back to work. And I can say that during the first year of the NEI, or National Export Initiative, we are in fact on track to do that. It involves hitting about 17% growth every year for 5 years, but we're on track to do that. But obviously, it depends on opening up foreign markets and getting them to buy more American stuff. We are very excited about the job-creating potential of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. The package levels and expands the playing field for U.S. workers, farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and service providers. The tariff cuts in KORUS alone could increase the exports of American goods to Korea by $10 to $11 billion annually, which will support tens of thousands of jobs in America. To translate this locally, based on most recent data that we have, the exports of manufactured goods support 42,000 jobs in Maryland. The Port of Baltimore is an important gateway for two-way trade with Korea. For example, since 2003, all Suzuki cars manufactured in Korea and exported to the U.S., plus some of the Kias and Hyundais manufactured in Korea, have entered the United States through the Port of Baltimore. KORUS will make these cars cheaper, and theoretically more of them will come here and they will have to come through Baltimore. And we're also very happy that we've reached agreement with the Koreans that will allow more American cars to be sold in Korea, some of which may or may not be going out of Baltimore. We'll have to see how that plays out. We know that implemented trade agreements work for Maryland. Take, for example, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement that was negotiated, I guess it's going on 10 years ago now. As a result of that agreement, Maryland's exports to Chile have increased by 500% over the course of those years. We know that Korea plays an important role in Maryland's strategy for economic growth through increased international trade and investment. Korea was chosen to be the first location for a Maryland State Foreign Trade Office, which was opened in Seoul in 2008. KORUS guarantees U.S. service suppliers the right to compete with their Korean counterparts on a level playing field for Korea's $580 billion services market. That's significant. Supporting even more jobs for American workers in sectors ranging from delivery and telecommunications services to education and healthcare. This is good news for the U.S. service industry, which accounts for over 80% of U.S. employment, and it's good news for Maryland's thriving telecommunications industry, which is Maryland's second largest service export industry, and we expect the telecommunications service export group to be one of the biggest winners of KORUS. Additionally, U.S. jobs will come from breaking down non-tariff barriers that keep U.S. exports out of Korea, and by requiring stronger protection and enforcement of intellectual property protection rights in Korea. KORUS also includes strong transparency obligations that will help to address corruption in international trade and investment, and it includes obligations for the Koreans to undertake on anti-bribery measures. In addition, the agreement provides U.S. investors with locked-in and in some cases improved access in key sectors in Korea, such as delivery services, legal services, and telecommunications, where, for example, for the first time, American companies will be allowed to own 100% of a subsidiary operating in Korea. We must act quickly, however. Our fiercest competitors are marching ahead while our Congress has been spinning its wheels. We have to act now if we want to maintain and increase our market share in the world economy. The European Union recently finished a free trade agreement with Korea, which will go into effect on July 1st. And this could seriously disadvantage U.S. exporters in the Korean market. Without KORUS, U.S. exporters will still face having to pay Korean duties. And in the agricultural sector, for example, the average Korean duty in the ag sector is over 50%, and their duty on manufactured products is around 7%. After the European deal passes, the Europeans won't have to pay that. We will. It's going to make it tougher for us to compete with the Europeans in the Korean market. We finished the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement in 2007, and it's been waiting for approval ever since. To help break the logjam in the Congress on this, the Obama administration consulted extensively with U.S. stakeholders, including unions, business leaders, members of Congress, and others. And we went back and reached an agreement with a deal with the Korean government in December of 2010 to ensure creation of a level playing field, particularly for U.S. auto companies and U.S. auto workers as they seek to export to the Korean market. We believe this package makes it a better deal for the U.S. auto industry and auto workers, and it is winning widespread bipartisan support. In fact, the United Auto Workers, who generally don't endorse trade deals, has come out and endorsed the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement as modified by the December 2010 package. So we're quite confident that when we can get that deal to the Congress, we will get a bipartisan majority of both houses to pass it. I can't end any remarks on trade without talking about Colombia and Panama as well. Although smaller than KORUS, the Colombia and Panama Free Trade Agreements also provide significant economic benefits for the U.S. Most exports to the United States from Colombia and Panama are already eligible for duty-free treatment under our trade preference programs. In fact, over 95% of all the products coming in from Panama right now already come into the United States duty-free. So there will be no jobs lost in the United States because of free trade with Panama or Colombia. They are already coming in duty-free. The only people who are paying duties are the American exporters going into those markets. An estimated $3.2 billion has been paid by U.S. exporters going into Colombia since the trade agreement was first signed in 2006. And that's money that either could have gone to raise the bottom line of American companies, and it certainly would have made American products cheaper, and therefore we would have sold even more to Colombia than we had been selling over the last 10 years. And we're hopeful that once the FTA is passed, that with those tariffs eliminated, we will be able to substantially increase exports to Colombia. But again, it's important that we not stall this too long. Colombia has historically been a great market for the United States, especially in the agricultural sector. While our FTA has been stalled in our Congress, the Colombians haven't been sitting on their hands. They've done a free trade agreement with the Canadians. They're working on one with the Europeans. And we've seen our market share in the Colombian sector fall from 44% in 2007 down to 21% in 2010, in part because we're continuing to pay their high tariffs and some of our trading partners are not, and we feel we need to level the playing field. Poultry is one good example of this. Poultry, as I'm sure you all know, is Maryland's leading agricultural export and accounts for 1/3 of total farm receipts. However, Maryland farmers face very high barriers on sales to Colombia, including difficult sanitary regulations and tariffs of up to 164% on certain products, including leg quarters. The trade agreement will phase out those tariffs and eliminate the non-tariff barriers to Maryland's products, such as requiring Colombian inspectors to inspect individual poultry facilities before accepting poultry shipments from Maryland companies. The Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement will provide a significant economic and commercial benefit to U.S. exporters. The International Trade Commission has estimated that it will expand exports of U.S. goods to Colombia by more than $1 billion and increase the U.S. gross domestic product by $2.5 billion, creating additional thousands of jobs for American workers. The Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement will help strengthen the Colombian economy and promote its growing middle class, thereby bolstering a steadfast strategic partner in the hemisphere. The agreement will help cement our broader relationship with a country that plays an increasingly important role in the region and around the world, including, they have a seat for the next 2 years on the UN Security Council, and they're increasingly active in supporting peacekeeping operations around the world. The Panama Trade Agreement, and it's awkward that we call them all something slightly differently. So the Panama thing is called the Panama Trade Agreement. It doesn't have the word free in there for reasons that I'll explain later if necessary. But the Panama Trade Agreement will strengthen our relationship with another key strategic partner in the hemisphere. Our historic ties to Panama date back to the construction of the Panama Canal, and today there are approximately 160,000 American citizens living in Panama. A number of notable Panamanians have come to the United States and enriched our culture, including Chico Salmon, who was a member of the 1970 World Series winning Baltimore Orioles team. Unfortunately for Orioles fans, the current Yankee pitcher Mariano Rivera also came to the United States from Panama, so you have to take the good with the bad. Panama is a dynamic, rapidly growing, strategic, and democratic partner. They are in the midst of a $2.5 billion canal expansion project to build a third set of locks. Panama also continues to grow in importance as a regional air hub. Last year, for example, Copa Airlines announced its intention to purchase $2 billion in Boeing aircraft, and the government is investing $800 million in construction and flight line infrastructure to expand the Tocumen International Airport passenger and cargo facilities. In addition to the canal and the air connections, the Martinelli administration has outlined a 5-year plan to spend $10 billion in domestic infrastructure investments between now and 2014. The trade agreement will contribute to this by giving American companies enhanced access to bid on Panamanian government procurement projects and to improve market access for U.S. service providers. U.S. investment will benefit from greater transparency under the accord. The United States has long been Panama's leading economic partner, and we have posted a $5.7 billion trade surplus with Panama in 2010. However, like Colombia, Panama has recently signed free trade agreements with Canada and the EU, and that means it will be facing increasing competition in that market if we don't act. The administration is currently discussing with congressional leadership how we can work together to accomplish the president's comprehensive trade agenda this year. Passage of the 3 free trade agreements, trade adjustment assistance for workers, the generalized system of preference, and the Andean Trade Preference Program, and permanent normal trade relations with Russia as they head toward WTO membership. Korea and Panama are ready to go right now. We're continuing to work with the Colombians to get their agreement in a position to be able to submit that to the Congress. Essentially what the president has said is we laid out in a labor action plan a series of steps that the Colombian government has undertaken to perform between now and June 15th to improve the enforcement and protection of labor rights in Colombia. And the president has said that if the Colombians meet the obligations that they undertook in the labor action plan by June 15th, he will then be in a position to submit the Colombia FTA so that all 3 FTAs can go forward to the Congress to be considered. We're working very hard to make sure that Congress is in a position to pass the entire trade agenda certainly by the end of this year, and quite frankly, it's our hope that we can get these things done before they go out on their August recess, the first week in August. So in conclusion, let me just say that we believe that we are on the brink of bringing home to America more job opportunities that can help working families in every corner of our country. These agreements are more than just about trade. They link our countries together in an unprecedented way with countries that are vital partners of the United States, both in the foreign policy realm and in the economic realm. The administration realizes that we can't do this by ourselves. We know that in the current political environment, it won't be easy to make these agreements happen. There is no one leader in this government that can do it alone, and we are looking to organizations like the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs to help educate the public on the benefits of trade. And so I'm very grateful to your invitation to come out here today. I thank you for your help as we attempt to educate the public on the benefits of trade, and I will now be quiet and be happy to accept any questions, comments, or rude comments about my tardiness from anyone in the audience, but thank you very much. Yeah, the young lady in the back. Okay. Well, the question in brief dealt with the position of the Colombian and Panamanian governments on legalizing drugs and legalizing the export of drugs. Sadly, Madam, I'm afraid particularly I can speak, I spent a lot of time with the Colombians. The Colombians are at exactly the opposite point from where you are at this moment. The reason that Colombia has already essentially one-way free trade with the United States is that the Andean Trade Preferences Act was passed by Congress some 10 years ago to help incentivize farmers in Colombia and business people in Colombia not to get involved in the cocaine trade or the drug trade, either things that were grown and created there or which were transiting there on their way to the United States. And the current administration in Colombia, the Santos administration, is wholeheartedly supportive of the war on drugs and working with us on that in a cooperative manner. And it is to support the Santos government in that effort, which we believe is in both of our national interests, to bring law and order to all parts of Colombia. And there are some parts of Colombia which are still a little bit of the Wild West. That we want to get the free trade agreement passed as rapidly as possible. We believe the increase in trade will increase income tax revenues in Colombia and put the Santos administration in a position to be able to do even more in the war on drugs, as well as to improve labor and environmental standards in the country. And so it is for that reason that we are so enthusiastic in our support for the FTA. Oh, sorry. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Well, if I can summarize the question, and please yell at me if I don't capture the essence of your question. The question is, how do we ensure that the Korean government will live up to the terms of the FTA and allow American products to enter the country freely after the tariffs are phased out? One of the problems with any trade agreement is that there are transparent barriers and non-transparent barriers. Tariffs are a relatively transparent barrier. You have to list them with the World Trade Organization. People have to pay them. They're published. And you know that it's going to cost me a 7% tax to get a John Deere tractor into South Korea right now, and that we know that under the FTA in the course of 5 years that tariff will go to zero. So the tariff side we can measure very carefully. There are a number of provisions in the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement that seeks to ensure that the Korean government or Korean conglomerates don't try to use non-tariff barriers, whether they're health and safety or other regulatory mechanisms, to prevent American products from coming in after the tariffs have gone to zero. I'm prepared to guarantee the tariffs will go to zero. There's no way to hide not dropping your tariffs to zero. But just looking at the car deal that we did with Korea in December, we made several changes to what had been negotiated by the earlier administration. One of the things we did was we got the Koreans to eliminate their tariffs on American cars at a much faster rate than we are going to reduce our tariffs on incoming Korean cars. And we put in what is called a snapback provision, saying that if the Koreans don't live up to particularly the car deal, and really, frankly, one of the big exports that where we see a need in the Korean market is for certain American cars. They don't have an equivalent of a Jeep or a Hummer, and we think there's a market there for four-wheel drive American vehicles. So we think there's things that we're good at that they haven't branched into yet. So we want to preserve the ability of U.S. manufacturers of vehicles like that to get into the Korean market. There certainly has been a history in the past of Korea using regulations to restrict access. Anyway, with the snapback provision, if Korea acts to use regulations to keep American cars out, we can then reimpose our tariffs on Korean light trucks and cars coming into the United States. So it's not a forever FTA if they don't live up to their half of the bargain. The other thing that it explicitly says in the December 2010 agreement is the U.S. is essentially grandfathered on all health and safety and regulatory and environmental protection regulations. So if our vehicles currently meet the Korean standards, they can't change them to say, suddenly the American headlights, can't come in anymore. So they can change their health and safety standards to be whatever they want, but our cars are grandfathered and they don't count. Up to a total of 250,000, which will get it done. If we start selling the more than $250,000 cars, if we start selling the more than 250,000 cars in a year, then I'll take whatever restrictions they want to put on the ones above that. Right now we're selling them cars in the thousands, so if we get to the hundreds of thousands, we're doing all right. So you got a follow-up?
No, what about technology, borrowing, or theft? Any of that, or is that done?
We've done everything you can do at the government-to-government level. There is a very strong gold-plated, gold standard intellectual property protection chapter that has the possibility of bringing sanctions if Korean companies steal American intellectual property. There are also anti-bribery and other financial obligations that go as far as we could think of a way to go to do this. Can we guarantee that there'll never, ever be another barrier to a U.S. firm? Probably not, but we did everything we possibly could think of to stamp that out. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The question basically was on the high-tech area the gentleman was talking about. He had an experience with a mechanism that looked like an iPhone and quacked like an iPhone and swam like an iPhone, but was in fact a counterfeit iPhone manufactured in Korea. And his question was, would the intellectual property chapter of the USKorea FTA give Apple the right to sue the Koreans for failure to carry out their own intellectual property protection? And the answer is yes. The question is, what is the status of the Korea Free Trade Agreement in front of our Congress right now? Right now, we're in a very strange and very difficult to explain political never-never land with Congress on all three free trade agreements. Years ago, Congress passed something called Fast Track that authorized presidents to negotiate trade deals and bring them back to Congress for an up or down vote with no ability to filibuster or amend. And so basically, if the president who had Fast Track authority negotiated a deal that met certain criteria as laid down by the Congress, we could bring those agreements back and they'd be passed as an up or down vote. And the Chile Free Trade Agreement and the Peru Free Trade Agreement and Singapore and Australia, all of those agreements were passed under Fast Track. Then a couple of years after that, when it came up for renewal, they decided to get jazzy with it and change the name to Trade Promotion Authority. So then TPA became the new acronym for Fast Track. It's exactly the same stuff. That expired in the closing days of the Bush administration, and Congress has not extended it yet. And we negotiated what we thought was the Colombia Panama and Korea Free Trade Agreements under the then Trade Promotion Authority, and we took them to Congress, and Speaker Pelosi decided that she didn't want to deal with them on that non-amendable, non-delayable sort of mechanism, and she found a way to not apply Trade Promotion Authority to these three FTAs, and therefore they sat on the table for years. We've kind of broken through that now. One of the very positive bipartisan developments in the last couple of months has been that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Camp, has said that he's going to treat the new and improved Korea deal and Panama and Colombia as if they were still under the original Trade Promotion Authority bill under which they were negotiated. So we're going through the Trade Promotion Authority processes, even though theoretically Trade Promotion Authority has long expired now these 3 years. So we're at the stage right now where we are walking through, the administration's lawyers are walking through the three free trade agreements, the legal texts of them, with lawyers from both the House and the Senate. And essentially we're explaining every place where the legal obligations that the United States is undertaking are different from the last free trade agreement which Congress passed, which in this case was Peru, the U.S.-Peru free trade agreement. So we've gone through and we've highlighted all the areas where we've changed it, and basically where the text is exactly the same as where we just copied it from the U.S.-Peru free trade agreement. They're not even asking us questions about that. That's done. So we're just looking at the deltas. We're just looking at the changes. The plan right now is roughly, assuming the Colombians do what they say they are going to do, in which they have shown great evidence that they are working very hard to do in terms of labor by June 15th. We would hope that there would be congressional action on them starting in late May or early June, and we should be on a timeline to get them passed all the way through the Congress before they go out on their August recess. If everything sticks, that's the timeline that we're looking at. Yes, ma'am. Well, the question was, why don't we ever do fair trade as opposed to free trade? And I guess my response to that is we're trying to make it both as fair and as free as possible, and particularly in the case of Colombia and Panama, they already have free trade to the United States. 95% or more of their goods already come here duty-free. So we're not being protected by tariffs from imports from Colombia and Panama, and quite frankly, they're not flooding into the United States and putting Americans out of work. One of our major imports from Colombia are cut flowers that we use for Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. And given the growing cycle, it's a lot cheaper to bring them in from Colombia than it is to grow them in hothouses in the United States in February. So the only serious tariffs that are being cut as a result of the Colombia and Panama FTAs are the ones in Colombia and Panama, which I think is a better than average deal for us. So I'm afraid I don't entirely endorse the direction of your question, but thank you for it.
Well,
Okay.
I've been involved in this in a long time.
Okay.
And I fought the NAFTA agreement, I want you to know that. And we are still getting screwed on that one. You don't tell me we're not.
Well, sadly, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one too, because I've been doing this a long time, and that actually worked out pretty well from my perspective. Yes, sir. Okay, well, the nucleus of the question was, what products do we expect to increase U.S. exports of to these three countries if the FTAs were to pass? Yes, one of the big winners will be on the agricultural side. The U.S. is one of the major agricultural supplier to the world, and if you can knock out 164% tariffs on chicken going into Colombia, we're going to sell them a lot more chicken, and that's a good thing. It's good for the Colombians. They get cheaper chicken, they get less malnutrition, and we sell them stuff that we're good at growing in this case. But we're also good at selling them things like John Deere tractors and earth-moving equipment. Just talking about Panama, they're doing a $5.25 billion renovation of the Panama Canal, and we are one of the world's major suppliers of big honkin' dump trucks that go for millions and millions of dollars each. And I'd rather compete with the Europeans and the Japanese with us not having to pay the 15% tariff into Panama and make them pay it, and rather than the reverse where we have to pay it and they don't have to pay it. So we would expect manufactured goods from the United States sort of across the board in the telecommunications area, in the earth-moving and agricultural area to go up significantly, as well as automobiles. I mean, they already buy their airplanes from us. They already buy many of their semiconductors from us, and we would like that to continue. And if they want to buy a lot more of their agricultural products from us, we think that's a great idea. I'm sorry, you had a question, sir? All right, so the question is, if we already give, particularly Colombia and Panama, low or no tariffs, and in the case of Korea, our average tariff on imported Korean products is less than 3%, and the average industrial tariff on U.S. products going into Korea is well over 6%, closer to 7%, and of course on the agricultural side, it's much higher than that. Are a couple of different things. In the case of both Panama and Colombia, they want access to more American products on a lower cost basis. They need to be able to buy the earth-moving equipment necessary to do this major renovation of the Panama Canal. And from their government perspective, they don't want to do anything that will jack up the prices that they have to pay for machinery they know they're going to have to buy anyway. But really, both of them see this as a very important way that they can encourage economic development in their countries. They think that they will get, it's essentially a good housekeeping seal of approval. If they buy onto the very strong protection of intellectual property chapters that are in the free trade agreements, if they carry out and buy into the very strong labor protections that are in these FTAs, if they buy the very strong anti-corruption and transparency and investor protector type provisions that are in these agreements, they think that they will get more investment not only from the United States but from other countries, and this will allow them to create more jobs and increase the speed with which they're developing. So they're seeing this essentially as a good housekeeping seal that will lead to more investment from the U.S. and other countries who will say, well, gee, if the Americans think highly enough of Colombia that we give them this kind of market access, then maybe we should check it out, is essentially the vision. And then so they think that will lead to really ramping up their rate of development, and there's reason to believe that they're probably right. Sorry, ma'am, you got a question? Well, the question was, how do we guarantee that Colombia will carry out the protection of labor leaders and labor rights that the administration has negotiated with them? Let me start by saying, over the course of the spring, we negotiated a very extensive set of requirements with the Colombian government to protect and increase the protection of labor rights and labor leaders in Colombia. And then we staged that agreement with several different tranches, timelines for when they could do the things they could do quickly, very quickly, and then other things they would do a little bit later and a little bit later, because you can't change the universe instantly. We announced that agreement with the Colombians when their president Santos was in the United States on April 7th. By April 15th, they had met the first tranche of things that we had agreed to in the Labor Action Plan. There's another big tranche of deliverables coming up on June 15th. It's laid out in the action plan, and this is up on the White House webpage, and Congress has this. I mean, this is very public stuff. And it's actually been endorsed by a number of labor unions in Colombia, saying that this is, from their perspective, revolutionary stuff, that the government is committing to do all the things that are in the action plan that goes on for pages and pages and pages of a very dense print. We have every reason to believe that essentially these are things that particularly the Santos administration wants to do, and they're using this as the excuse to slam it through their Congress. And they've had great success with a number of the steps that were on the table already. For example, several years ago, Colombia passed a law that said anyone who it's illegal to try to prevent anyone from organizing a union in a company, and any company that seeks to prevent unions from being organized among its workers can be fined. And they, in fact, put in very, very serious fines, theoretically. But then they said, this is so sensitive, we're not going to make this actually go into effect for years and years and years. And they punched the actual implementation date into the far future. What we did with the Colombians in this agreement that we negotiated on April 7th, announced on April 7th, was they said, okay, we're going to move up the implementation date. And we hope to get that done by the end of May. We said, okay, if you can get a bill through your Congress changing the implementation date on something as politically sensitive as this in Colombia by the end of May, that's a pretty good thing. Well, they got it through their Congress by the end of April. And then they made the law effective the day that it passed. So that's already the law in Colombia. So they've done things like that. In the Labor Action Plan, we agreed they were going to hire 95 police inspectors and assign them to work with prosecutors on the prosecutor's office, prosecuting cases of violence against labor leaders. And they said, okay, given our it'll probably take us until the end of the year to do that. So we agreed that by December of this year, they would have hired 95 police inspectors to work with the prosecutors. Well, when they got back to Bogota, they thought about it and they said, okay, we're going to take 100 of our current experienced police inspectors and assign them to work with the prosecutors starting right now, and then we're going to hire another 100 police to fill in behind them. But so the obligation in terms of having 100 police inspectors assigned permanently to work with the prosecutors on labor cases, instead of getting rookies in December, they got experienced guys today. So clearly the Colombian administration is really leaning forward, trying to do everything that's in the labor action plan. They have committed to meeting with us every 3 months for the next 3 years to go over how they're doing and what they're doing to implement this action plan. There are a couple of obligations on the United States as part of this. We've provided to give them training, to work with them, to help train their prosecutors, to help train some of their police on basic crime scene investigatory techniques, and to show them how we do protective services and deal with essentially hate crime type activities. And they are just lapping that up. That's something they want more help with. So our obligation is we have to provide that training. Their obligation is that they have to hire the police that will help them train. Can I guarantee that 3 years from now they won't stop? I don't think they're going to stop. But you know, I'm not that good at projecting the future. But we've done everything we possibly can, and they've done everything we've asked them to do, and more and faster. So I'm feeling pretty good about the direction that we're going, certainly with this administration under the deal that we cut in April. Any other questions? Sir. So the question is, are free trade agreements a trend, and can we expect to see more of them in the future, including with places like Iran and China? As I just told this young lady, I'm not that good at predicting the future, but yes, I think it is safe to say that free trade agreements, both with the United States and other trading partners and other trading partners among themselves, is a growth industry, and it's going up. Even as we talk about these 3 completed free trade agreements, which are ready for congressional action now, or will be by June 15th, the U.S. is in the process of negotiating a free trade agreement that we call the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There was a meeting today in Big Sky, Montana. Why Big Sky, Montana, you ask? Because Senator Baucus from the Senate Finance Committee said, gee, wouldn't it be great to have a big meeting in Big Sky, Montana? And we said, sure, you bet. Anyway, we had a big meeting in Big Sky, Montana with trade ministers from the 8 countries that we're negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership with. Those include a couple of countries that we already have free trade agreements with, including Australia and Singapore. So essentially nothing is going to change there. But we're also negotiating with countries that we don't have FTAs with, including Brunei and Malaysia and Vietnam. And essentially what we've said is, okay, if dear Malaysia, dear Vietnam, you say you're really, really hot to do a free trade agreement with the United States. If you will step up and buy the same intellectual property protection chapter that is in the USKorea Free Trade Agreement, if you'll buy the same protection of investor rights and labor rights and environmental protection that's in the US-Peru FTA or the US-Korea FTA, we'll talk with you, we'll try to work it out. And if we finish that negotiation, which we are hoping to do, at least have the outlines of it done by November of this year, it'll take into next year to do all the details, and then perhaps sometime as early as a year from now, and that's really ambitious. We'd be in a position to take that to our Congress, and then they can vote on it up or down. So there are FTA negotiations going on that have not gotten a lot of publicity except in the geek trade press. And then what happens after we finish that one, or are we going to start another one after that? Possibly, but we don't know who that would be with yet. Yes, ma'am. So the question was, what is this costing us and what are we getting back for it? Well, in terms of the travel budgets and the per diem for our negotiators, it's not that much in the cosmic scheme of things for the federal government. I would just point to the numbers from the International Trade Commission, which is an independent analytical body. In just the Colombia FTA, they said, well, that's going to increase U.S. exports by over $1 billion on an annual basis. But the increase of that $1 billion in exports coupled with lower prices for certain things that we buy from Colombia, are going to generate $2.5 billion in economic growth in the United States. The numbers for Korea would be similar and bigger. So a number of people that don't work for the administration have come to the conclusion that these agreements are in fact significant net winners for the United States economically. Yes, there is some upfront development cost, but it's really very, in the cosmic scheme of things, are really very small. Yes, sir. So the question is whether the USKorea, South Korea FTA will essentially open up an avenue for trade with North Korea. And the question, how much trade is there between North Korea and South Korea? The answer is there is very little trade between North Korea and South Korea. It's mostly the South sending humanitarian food supplies to the North. There is essentially a free trade zone on the border between North Korea and South Korea called Kaesong. And there is the FTA text explicitly says in it that there is a very strict rule of origin that anything entering the United States from South Korea has to be made in South Korea by South Koreans, and that there are various ways of measuring and determining that. But there is nothing in the FTA that was going to facilitate or allow products made from North Korea, even transiting through the Kaesong Free Trade Zone, to enter the United States in any way, shape, or form. So nothing has changed in that regard. So sadly, if your question was implying that wouldn't it be great to open up the North Korean market, this isn't going to be the mechanism to get that done. So, yes, sir. That's not something that we deal with through. The question is, are there any protections built into the free trade agreement that would keep American farmers from any American commodity producers from selling their products overseas if they get a better price than they get domestically? And the answer is no, we don't directly address that through the free trade agreements. That involves a level of affecting markets that the government is very reluctant to get into. There are a number of programs, particularly on the agricultural side, that peg the supports and the subsidies that USDA through the farm bills give to American farmers that would have some impact on that sort of situation. But essentially, we are, given that we are the world's predominant agricultural exporter, we're prepared to let the market deal with those kinds of contingencies.
I think we could have one more question.
The question is, why would anybody in Congress be silly enough to oppose these deals if they're as wonderful as I say they are? The short form of that is it depends. In the case of Korea, there was significant concern that the agreement as originally negotiated in 2007, didn't do enough to protect American auto workers, both from potential floods of imports from South Korea, and didn't do enough to open up the Korean market to American exports on the other side. So we negotiated the December 2010 package and have now gotten the endorsement from the United Auto Workers. So I think we've checked that box. On the case of, no one's really opposed to Panama, so they just kind of get stuck behind Colombia and Korea in the queue. There's a lot of concern, certainly there was in 2006, about the labor situation under the Uribe administration in Colombia. And again, there was no real significant concern about the U.S. being flooded with products from Colombia, putting Americans out of work. This was not a warm over of the Great Sucking Sound Ross Perot debate that went back to NAFTA. But the AFL-CIO and several other unions in the United States basically said, we don't support a free trade agreement with a country that isn't doing everything humanly possible to drive down the persecution and murder of labor leaders. And there's no question that during the 1990s and the early 2000s, Colombia did lead the world in deaths of labor organizers. We've worked very hard to address that concern, and the April 7 package that the president announced, we think goes a very, very far way toward addressing those concerns, so that we're hoping that when they do everything by June 15th they've promised to do, and the president is in a position to certify that and send the FTA up to the Congress, that in fact when we finally get down to a vote, that the vast majority of both houses will in fact vote for them. But there are, and I certainly understand the legitimate concerns of people concerned about the labor situation in Colombia. It was really, really bad. It's much better now. And the question kind of is, well, okay, if you've gone from really, really bad to much better but not perfect, how do you continue to get better? And we think that the way to get better is to work with the government to help them generate jobs and generate exports, just as we are generating jobs and exports by increasing trade. I mean, this can be a win-win pie growing exercise, and not just a how do you divide the pie differently exercise. And that this strengthened government role that the Colombian government would take on puts them in a position to put more resources into police inspectors to work with prosecutors and more prosecutors to try to bring some of the people who did these crimes in the past to justice and to discourage anyone thinking about committing crimes in the future from doing so. We think that's a better way to go. There are still some in the United States that are calling for no free trade agreement with Colombia until the situation there is perfect and there are no murders of anyone for any reason anywhere. I'm thinking that's not going to happen anytime soon, and I'd rather not have our lunch get eaten on the agricultural side by the Canadians in the meantime.
We, between a few extra minutes and rapid speech, I think we made up for the regular session. We certainly thank our guests. It's wonderful to have as much information presented as we've had, and by someone who's in such an authoritative position. And it's good of you to share so much of your time with us. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.